Feedback is the processes where the learner makes sense of performance-relevant information to promote their learning. This marks a shift in our understanding of feedback from the one-way transmission of information from teacher to student to a learning-focused approach in which the emphasis is on what students do with the feedback rather than the comments themselves. Therefore, it's important to emphasise to students that feedback can come from a range of sources, not just you as their teacher, and can take many forms, including individual and group feedback, formal and informal comments both inside and out of the classroom, written, verbal and online comments, as well as recorded interactions. Feedback can be integrated across an entire unit of study, and it can be helpful to break it down into 3 phases. The pre-preparation phase focuses on supporting students' learning before they submit their work, through the clear and inclusive communication of assessment task requirements and provision of opportunities to understand and discuss assessment criteria. The assessment phase focuses on supporting students' learning through the way in which work is assessed by providing timely and forward-looking feedback designed to support future work and focus on development. And the consolidation phase focuses on supporting students' learning after their work has been assessed, through encouraging their use of feedback by providing a landing place that allows students the time to reflect and act upon their feedback, as well as providing multiple opportunities for dialogue. Providing feedback that explains assessment tasks in each phase can help minimise the number of assessment queries and has been evidenced to increase student satisfaction with feedback. Effective feedback depends on what students, not teachers, do with feedback comments across a unit of study. However, there are several pieces of advice collected from the associated literature and the international higher education Twitter community that are worth bearing in mind when giving constructive and actionable feedback to students. Do ensure you use accessible language that clearly communicates and breaks down the expectations surrounding assessment tasks into manageable steps and includes a description of what specific terminology means within your context, such as critical evaluation or analysis. Don't rely on shorthand symbols and comments where the meaning and intended direction for future work are hidden as a result of the students not having been supported to develop a shared understanding of the requirements of the assessment task or academic conventions underpinning the discipline, which can lead to frustration and dissatisfaction with the feedback process. Do focus on the student's work and providing advice on how it can be developed so that comments focus on a particular section, sentence, or specific aspect of the work. This provides evidence of engagement and connection with the work and demonstrates a belief in its developmental potential. Don't focus on the personal attributes of the student, as this can have an impact on their self-confidence and can result in deactivating emotional reactions such as frustration and defensiveness, which can interfere with engagement with current and future feedback comments. Do provide balanced feedback containing 3 elements. 1. Strengths, or the aspects of the work that students should repeat in future. 2. Areas for improvement, or the aspects of the work that students should avoid repeating in future. And 3. Advice, or suggestions for how these areas for improvement could be addressed in future work. Each of these 3 elements should be accompanied by an explanation as to why it is a strength or area for improvement, and is significantly more likely to be acted upon if this explanation incorporates specific examples from the student's work. Don't rely on feedback that is separated or disembodied from the student's work, as it can be difficult for students to see how the comments relate to their work, and therefore how it can be acted upon to improve future work. The provision of detailed and specific feedback has been found to underpin what many students consider to be the most effective feedback. Do support students to develop a shared understanding of the expectations surrounding standards through the provision of clear and accessible opportunities for engagement with assessment briefings, feedback on drafts from teachers or peers, accessible and possibly student-created marking criteria, and evaluation of exemplars, for example. Don't focus feedback comments entirely on identifying errors or justifying the grade to an external examiner without explanation as to why it was an error or how to move the work up to the next level. In the absence of such explanation, this can lead to frustration and disillusionment with the feedback process, which can result in students disengaging from future feedback. And finally, Do focus on providing a small number of action points that will have the most positive impact on the future development of the work or learner. Within each action point, focus on clearly explaining a key area for development, linking this into a specific example from the student's work if possible, and providing suggestions for how to address it in future work. Don't overwhelm the students with too much feedback. Markers commonly feel under pressure to provide more and more detailed feedback to students. However, the provision of a small number of action points is a much more effective means of encouraging students to engage with their feedback than providing lots of feedback that can actually result in disengagement from the feedback process. Therefore, effective feedback identifies 3 key areas of student work: the strengths of the work that should be repeated, the areas in which the work could be improved, and advice for how to address each area for improvement, which should involve the use of accessible language that focuses on the work being assessed, that supports students to develop a shared understanding of expectations and standards more akin to the assessors, and that identifies 2 to 3 action points that will be most useful for the student to work on in future. Receiving feedback can be a highly emotive experience. These emotions can both help or hinder engagement with feedback and can activate or deactivate subsequent responses to it. Students are more likely to reject or ignore feedback if they evoke negative emotional responses, and such responses are often more extreme and influential on future behaviour. Negative emotional responses are commonly linked to receiving grades that fall below expectations and the provision of poor quality feedback that fails to provide guidance on future development. However, positive emotional reactions can be elicited if clear, actionable and fair feedback is provided regardless of whether grades fall above or below expectations. They can also be elicited by supporting students to acknowledge the influence of emotions on their learning and providing them with methods that can help them to accept critically constructive feedback. Such methods might include the sharing of teachers' own experiences and productive strategies to receiving painful feedback, and a commitment to student self-evaluation, which has been shown to convert potentially negative feelings towards a more productive end, in which feedback is seen as part of the developmental process. To summarise, in order to provide constructive and actionable feedback to students, remember to consider the following points. Focus on what students do with the feedback rather than the comments themselves. Consider how feedback opportunities can be integrated across a unit of study before, during and after each assessed task. Ensure that there is a landing place for feedback that provides students with the time and space to reflect and act upon the feedback comments they receive. Provide feedback that is accessible, balanced, focused on the work not the person, provides insight into the expected standards of quality work, as well as 2 to 3 action points for future development. Avoid using feedback containing shorthand comments such as symbols or jargon, unexplained or unactionable criticism, and an overwhelming amount of person-focused feedback comments. And finally, encourage students to commit to self-evaluation, in which they synthesize and develop action plans from their feedback over time to identify patterns in the comments received.